So I told you in our house, or at least I told you we're going to talk about good news and bad news. In our house, good news and bad news plays out in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it can be a little silly. With my kids, especially my boys when they were little, we would do good news and bad news at bedtime. And they knew exactly what it was. You know, we'd go in when they're, little bitty farts, and we'd read the Bible story, pray over them, all that kind of good stuff. And usually when I put them to bed, it was roughhousing time, because as a dad, I had this theory that if I could get them all wound up and get them completely excited, that it would get out the last bit of their energy and they'd sleep better. My wife did not ever agree with that. But one of the things I would do is I'd do good news, bad news after we kind of done the Bible study and the prayer time. And I'd ask my boys, and I'd say, you want the good news? You want the bad news? And they would just howl, man. I mean, stuffed animals flying, throwing stuff at me, hiding under the blankets, just giggling and laughing, because they knew what was coming, man. They always knew it was coming. And I go, do you want the good news or you want the bad news? And they would say, I want the good news, or they'd say, I want the bad news. It was always the same thing. The good news is I'm eventually going to stop. And then they go, what the bad news? And they'd hide under their blankets and just start giggling and laughing. And then I would just the bad news is I'm going to tickle. And I just pounce on them, start tickling, grabbing their knees. They're kicking and screaming and hitting, and we're just having a great time. I love that, man. I miss those days. Trying to do that with my 25-year-old now, it's really weird. It just does not go as well when I walk in his bedroom at night, his wife's laying next to him. I'm like, good news or bad news? It's like, Dad, get out of here, man. You're creepy. Don't do that. I just kidding, man. There's also times in our family where good news, bad news carries a deeper connotation, it's a little harder. I remember, and she's going to be just fine. Did you hear this part first? She's going to be fine. But I remember the very first time when I just found out my wife had been diagnosed with cancer, and we didn't know that she was going to be fine. We had no idea. But I remember taking a knee at the hospital with my boys. My daughter was too young at that time to explain it to her, but I remember talking to Justin and Levi, and they're about this high, little guys, and trying to explain to them, hey boys, I got bad news. And trying to explain to them what cancer was, and that mom's really sick and we don't really know what's going to happen. And I remember for those first 2 weeks we had no idea. We didn't know what kind of cancer it was. We knew she was either going to be fine or she wasn't. She wasn't going to survive it, or it was the type of cancer she had, it's two extremes. Either you make it or you don't. And then I remember in this particular type of cancer, when we finally got the letter back from Mayo Clinic, and it took weeks to get Mayo Clinic to give us a diagnosis on it. And I said, boys, we got good news. Mom's going to be just fine. And she'll die with cancer, not from cancer. And that was great, great, great news. Tonight, I've got good news and bad news for you. And honestly, it's good news and bad news about you. What do you want to hear first? You want the good news, you want the bad news? All right, pretty unified. You all want the bad news. Bad news is, man, it's been a great week. Bad news is, that's not really bad news. It's been a great week. That's bad news. Man, the good news is going to be awesome then. The bad news is that even though it's been a great week, every one of you all about to screw this thing up. You're all going to go home. Some of you won't even make it through the night. Most of you within the week, maybe within a couple of weeks, all these commitments you've made, all as geeked out and as high and as excited as you are, you're going to blow it, man. Adult leaders included. You're just going to screw this thing up. That's the bad news. The good news is that the gospel's for all, forever. And the good news is that Jesus can redeem everything. And every time you screw up, he can redeem it. So we've been living in the book of John. We're going to eventually get to the book of John chapter 21. If you want to turn there and hold on to it, go ahead. I got to take a little bit of liberty here. How many in this room, if you're going to be completely honest, don't really know, if I mention a guy named Peter in the Bible, you don't really know a whole lot about him or who he is? Okay, let me see your hands up high. Don't be embarrassed. Can I tell you the truth? I need to get a lay of the land to know how much of the story I need to tell. Raise your hands up if you don't really know who he is. Sweet, great, thank you. Thank you for that gift. All right, I'm great with that. So let me kind of give you a story because we've not talked about it here. Thank you for your honesty. There's a guy in the Bible named Peter, and he is one of Jesus. Jesus has these 12 guys that journey with him. Then he's got 3 of them that he's super, super tight with. It's kind of like you. You've got a lot of friends, but usually there's 2 or 3 that you tend to be a little closer to. Jesus has 12, and out of the 12, there's 3 that are kind of in this inner circle. Peter is one of those 3. The others are James and John. We're not worried about them today. Peter is he's one of those guys in the inner circle. Peter's the first guy who ever says, man, we believe you're the Christ, the Son of God. He's the one that gives that first real confession. And Jesus is man, blessed, you're blessed, man. Peter's the guy that, if you don't know his background, like I would like Peter, some of you wouldn't. He is rough, man. He's a commercial fisherman. Now, I don't mean like he like casts out the pole and reels it in like your dad does. I mean like commercial fisherman, like if you're gonna watch The Greatest Catch or Deadliest Catch, he would be like one of the captains on that boat. He's rough. He probably says things that are inappropriate, so he's my kind of guy. He's just awesome. He's probably burly, tough. His hands are probably pretty rugged. I mean, he's just a tough, rough guy, man. He's got a blue-collar job, and Jesus just likes him. But here's the deal. Peter says things he shouldn't say. He's kind of a mess. He does things he shouldn't do at times. That's why I really dig Peter, because we get a lot in common. He's just like on fire, man. He'll just get after it. He'll defend you. He'll stand up for you, all of that. Well, in this relationship with him, they kind of get to the end of Jesus' life. And Jesus sits down with these 12 guys. He's having a conversation with them over dinner. And they're sitting there talking over dinner, and Jesus says, hey, man, I got to go. He says, I'm going to give you this new command. I want you to love one another. He says, because, man, if you love one another, the whole world's going to know you're my disciples by your love. We talked about that last night. And then he says, but I got to go, man. And Peter's like, well, can I go with you? And Jesus is like, nah, man, you can't go. Okay, spoiler alert, Jesus talked about dying on the cross. Peter has no idea. Jesus is like, Peter, I got to go, man. Peter's like, can I go with you? And he's like, no, Peter, you can't come. At least not yet. You will later, but not now. Peter's like, no, I want to go with you. He doesn't know Jesus is talking about dying. I want to go with you. She's like, no, I don't think so, man, not right now. He's like, man, I would lay down my life for you. And Jesus kind of looks at him and goes, you see, no, not so much. Peter's like, what do you mean? We're tight. He's like, Peter, here's the honest truth, man. You need to know this. Like tonight, before this night is over, you're going to deny that you even know me. You're going to deny that we're even friends. You're going to deny that we're even associates 3 times before the night's over. In fact, Peter, before the rooster crows tonight, like a real literal rooster, before the rooster crows tonight, Peter, you'll tell people you don't even know me and there's no relationship between us before the night's over. Peter's just blown away. He's like, no way, no way, no way. So what happens, man? They arrest Jesus in this garden. Peter's there, and Peter being Peter, when they come to arrest him, he pulls out a sword. I like Peter. Pulls out a sword, goes to cut the dude's head off, and lops off his ear. Yeah, I told you he's a little wild. He's a little crazy, okay? Some of you guys got a youth pastor or like a volunteer. It's like, yeah, he'd probably do that. I can see him do that. He'd totally pull a sword out and like cut somebody's ear off. That guy's whack. Like, he's a little crazy. Little messy, all right? Or maybe they're like, some of you guys are like, that's my dad, man. My dad would totally do that. Like, he'd cut somebody's ear off. Peter pulls out a sword and just goes and lops the guy's ear off. Jesus is like, puts it back on. And then they take Jesus and they arrest him. And they take him into this religious leader's house and like, they're just grilling Jesus. They're interrogating him. They're like being mean to him. They're like basically almost putting him on trial almost. And Peter kind of sneaks in. He kind of gets into this courtyard where he's kind of close to where they're interrogating Jesus. And it's really kind of cold out that night. And so they've got this charcoal fire going. So you can picture in our day and age, like maybe like a 55-gallon drum, okay? Like sometimes you see the images on TV like the homeless standing over him. Picture it that way, and like as you're playing the movie in your head. Peter's kind of sitting there warming his hands. Jesus is over here where you can't see, like behind this curtain over here, getting interrogated. Peter's warming his hands. He can kind of hear a little what's going on. And these people start asking him like, hey man, weren't you like one of his disciples? Peter's kind of, I ain't got my sword no more. What am I going to do? He's kind of looking around. He's like, no man, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, maybe it's just dark here because it's charcoal fire, not a lot of light. Somebody else a little bit later is like, no, man. This servant girl, it's like this girl that's kind of working in that courtyard. She's like, no. You're one of those guys that hangs out with Jesus. Kind of like, what are you doing in here? Like, we're the people that are interrogating him. What are you doing in here? Peter's standing around that fire. He's like, no, man, not me. I don't know who he is. I don't know him. That's 2, warming his hands. Then this other guy goes, nah, man, I know you're one of those. This is one of the guys. He's related to the guy that Peter cut his ear off, okay? It may be dark, but I'm like, no, I know it's you. You cut my cousin's ear off. It's you, man. I know it's you. Peter's sitting there, he's still warming his hands by the fire, and he's like, no, not me, man. I don't know who Jesus is. I don't know that guy. And Luke 22 tells it this way. They bring Jesus out of like this house. Peter's standing there warming his hands by the fire. Jesus is coming out. And right when he says it the third time, they make eye contact. That's cold, man. Can you imagine like one of your closest friends, you're at some party, and all of a sudden you walk through a door in another room, and you're turning, and they say your name, like, hey, aren't you friends with so-and-so? And you guys hang out together. Like, you've been friends for like years now. And they're like, no, man, I don't know who she is. Can you imagine how that would feel? Like the depth of like betrayal, how much that would hurt. That's how this whole thing played out. And everybody knew it, man. Have you ever made a mistake so big that everybody knew and it's just hard to bounce back? I watch my boy. Cy is a phenomenal athlete, just crazy, crazy good. And we were playing, he was in a baseball game for his travel team. And there's this moment where Silas should have caught the ball, and it was an easy pop fly in the outfield. And I don't know if he got a little cocky or what, because he really is a good athlete. But instead of like going like a baseball player should, sitting on that ball in the outfield, getting your nose on it, getting behind it, getting good position, Cy just kind of jogs over, because he's lightning fast, jogs over, it just kind of stops here and puts his glove out to the side like this. Any baseball player right now is going, oh no. Because when you get a little cocky and you're not really, and we're in extra innings right now. Like, it's extra innings. Like, you got to catch the ball. Like, this is the third out. You catch this ball, we're back up to bat, one score, we win, it's a walk-off, we're done. But if this team scores, it's over. And I remember watching Cy, man, walking over, trying to catch that ball, and it just went right by his glove. Just right next to it. Run, score, game over. And man, sometimes when you make a mistake on a public stage, it's just embarrassing. Maybe you've thrown an interception. Maybe you've made a mistake in a game. Or maybe you've made a mistake in your own house. And it feels like everybody knows it. That's Peter right now. That's the background on Peter. Everybody knows it. In fact, every single gospel writer will write about this dude's mistake. Everybody will write about it. And Jesus knows it. Everybody knows it. Everybody's aware that Peter's a screw up. What do you do when you screw up? So tonight, we're going to land there for a little bit. I'm going to live there for just a bit, because you're all going to go home. And you're going to make promises that you're not going to look at this, you're not going to do that, you're not going to go here, you're going to stop this and stop that. And at some point, you're going to screw up. Some of you guys are going to make commitments. I'm going to be bold in my faith. I'm going to do this. I'm going to be outspoken. I'm going to say this. I'm going to have this conversation, and you're going to screw up. And the tough thing is, sometimes when we screw up, we want to kind of turtle up, man. We just want to get in the shell. We don't want anyone to know, and we just kind of give up. That's the temptation that Peter is running to right now. And Peter had to know, man. He's been with Jesus when he tells the story of like the prodigal son that comes home, the story of the lost sheep that the shepherd goes looking for. He knows the story of like the lost coin that the lady searches. He knows the story that God loves to find lost things. Peter knew he could come home, but he doesn't, man. And that's one of the things that happens a lot to us. That when we screw up, we push ourselves into isolation. And that's what we find out happened with Peter. We're going to jump into John chapter 21 right now. You got your Bibles? We're finally there. Took me a while. I needed to set up the story of Peter for people in the room that just didn't know his story, okay? Because if I just start reading this, you're like, I got no idea what the problem is. So the first time that Jesus ever meets Peter, okay? He's a commercial fisherman. Jesus meets him and he says, hey man, you're not going to fish for fish anymore. You're going to fish for men. Now I know that sounds a little bit creepy at first. It's like, that's odd. I don't mean like he's literally going to throw, nets into the water. They're going to pull out bodies and nets. Okay, it's a metaphor. Okay, don't take it literal. He's not like, hey, we're going to throw the nets over the boat. And they're going to pull bodies out of the water. No, that's not what it means. He's saying, hey man, I know you've caught fish as a commercial fisherman. Peter, I'm going to give you a new mission in life. That you're going to catch men and pull them into my kingdom and rescue them. You're going to bring these sheep that are lost, that the wolves are trying to attack, and you're going to bring them into the fold. You're going to go capture people that are hurting, capture people that are broken, and you're going to bring them into safety. You're going to catch men. So Peter, sell the boats, get rid of the nets, leave it all behind and follow me. And he does. Peter literally leaves You got to keep in mind, this was his career. He turns his back on his boats, he turns his back on his nets, and he follows Jesus, and he never fishes again until this day. This day, man. This day, he finds himself back in a boat that he had walked away from for years. And it's a big deal. John 21, here we go. Afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas called Didymus. That just means he's a twin, if you see that in your Bible. Verse 2, Simon called Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two other disciples were together. I'm going out to fish, Simon Peter told them. Here's why that's a big deal. Jesus had told him to leave that occupation. Now for me, I literally live like, not on the river, but like when you stand in our house and you look out our back window, we have a river right behind our house. I see it every day, okay? It's a river where I was baptized, my mom was baptized, my boys, my daughter, and someday Silas will be. So when I drink my morning coffee, I look at the river where I accepted Christ. Like, it's a big deal for me. And I love to go fish. I mean, I'll fish sometimes after work, we'll fish on a weekend, something like that. This is not that, okay? I've got a whole rack of rods I can just grab and go out there and just fish anytime I want, right? That's not what's happening here. This is commercial style fishermen. This is Peter securing a boat again. This is Peter securing a crew. This is Peter securing nets. You can't look at it like recreational, we're going to the lake for the weekend. This, when he says, I'm going out to fish, that word out means like a significant change in direction. Like he's plotting the course of his life and he's going back to his old habits. Like I did the Jesus thing, and he and Jesus have been restored. Luke tells us that. There's a moment, we don't know a whole lot about it, but we know that he had appeared to Simon and appeared to Peter, and so he and Jesus spiritually had a connection, but for some reason, Peter goes back to his old job. And he's taking his friends right along with him. And I know a lot of times that happens in our life too, because when we screw up, we just want to give up and we want to take as many people out with us as we can. Let's keep living in this text. I got to move faster than what I'm doing. It says this, and he says, I'm going out to fish. Remember, he'd been told, he had committed to walk away from the nets and follow Jesus, and now he's back doing his old job. He says, we'll go with you. So they went out in the boat that night, but they caught nothing. Okay, here's why that's important. The first time that Jesus ever met Peter, they'd fished and fished and fished and caught nothing. The first time they meet. So let's go over here. The first time Jesus and Peter meet, Peter fishes and fishes and doesn't catch anything. Jesus shows up and he says, hey man, go throw your nets out. And Peter's like, hey man, I know you're like a spiritual guy and all, like some sort of rabbi teacher dude, like preacher boy, but listen man, I'm the fisherman. I fished all night, we didn't catch anything. We're ready to clean the nets up, we're putting them away, we're done for the day. Jesus is like, no, go back out in the water and fish again. I think Peter's like, bro, preacher boy, you know what you're talking about. Peter's like, all right, man. Guys, get the nets back out, get the boats back out, let's go. Preacher boy wants to go fish again. They're like, bro, we just cleaned them. What do you mean? Peter's like, just do what he says. They go out that first time they meet, throw their nets out, and they catch fish like none other. Like, Jesus is like, fish, come. Boom, they fill up the nets, and these guys are like, what in the world? And that miracle, when Peter saw it, is like, I'll follow this guy anywhere until he doesn't. So they go back out, and that night, they haven't fished. They've not fished again like that since that day. And now they go back out the next time, and you want to talk about deja vu, the same thing's happening all over again. Let's move on. He says, we'll go with you. That night they caught nothing. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore. The disciples didn't realize it was Jesus. He called out to them, friends, haven't you any fish? Fishermen hate that question. No, they answered, and just like last time, he says, throw your net on the other side of the boat and you'll find some. When they did, they were unable to haul in the net because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved, that's John, he says, it's the Lord, screams it out. And as soon as Simon Peter heard him say it's the Lord, he wrapped his clothes on him because he'd taken off the outer cloak because he was trying to fish, and he just jumps into the water. Some of you guys don't know the story, but there's a moment earlier when Peter jumps out of a boat to meet Jesus. It's another time in Scripture. The last time that Peter stepped over the rail of a boat to go meet Jesus, he walked on water because Jesus had him, and it was a miracle. This day, Peter doesn't do this. This day, he doesn't walk on water. He swims and crawls back to shore. Moving on. It says, the other disciples followed the boat, towing the net full of fish. And it says in verse 9, when they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with some fish on it and some bread. I want to talk about that fish and bread. He's going to throw up a slide real quick. I'm going to walk you through it real quickly. That word for fire is really only used a couple of times in the New Testament. It's a unique word, man. It means it was a charcoal fire. Do you know the last time these two guys, these two friends met over a fire, eyeball to eyeball? Only time this word's really going to get used, the only other time, is that night when Peter stood in the courtyard and denied he even knew who he was. That word for fire is only used a couple of times. So Jesus has created the same moment that they had in that little courtyard. He's recreated it right there. And then all of a sudden, there's fish, there's bread. Some of you guys don't know the story, some of you do. Like fish and bread, man, it brings back all kinds of memories. Like especially as the disciples come up and they're like, where'd the fish and bread come from? And they're like, oh man, fish and bread. I remember what Jesus did like when he fed 5,000 with fish and bread. He's gonna have no problem feeding like 6 of us. Like there's so many deja vu moments happening right now. Moving on to the text a little bit deeper, it says this. Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish you caught. Simon Peter climbed aboard, dragged the net ashore full of large fish. And Jesus says, come and have breakfast. I would have thought Jesus is gonna say, you bunch of idiots, I'm gonna kick every one of your butts right now. You know, you are the worst bunch of disciples. Wait, he doesn't. Jesus meets them their failure and he loves them in spite of their mistakes. Then he goes on to the text. It says this, none of them dared ask who are they, knew it was the Lord. And it says that Jesus came, he took the bread and he gave thanks. Man, it's just like he did at this Last Supper. That night that Peter said, I'll never leave you, I'll never deny you. Jesus took the bread, he broke it, and he gave thanks, and he gave it to them. And he's doing the same thing. Like everything is reminding them. Everywhere they look, there's a memory right now of when they said they would stick with him. This is the third time that Jesus appeared to disciples. And now we reach this point where Jesus says, Peter, I want to put you back together. And I want to give you purpose in life. Luke tells us that Jesus and Peter had already met before this night. I think they've worked things out at a spiritual level as friends. But Jesus is going to do something right now that's deeper than just restoring him spiritually. He's going to restore his purpose. And one of the things I think that happens in our life is that when we mess up, we don't know what to do next. And so we just wallow in our pain, we wallow in our misery, and I would tell you, man, one of the first things you need to do is lay hold of the fact that God will forgive you and hold on to that. Because you're gonna have an enemy that tells you that when you screw up and you make a mistake, you're the only one and you're no good and you should just give up. That has man, I'm just telling you, Satan's MO is always the same. He wants to make you feel shame, he wants to make you feel guilt, he wants to make you feel despair, and then he finally wants to isolate you and devour you. That's what he does every time. You screw up and he tells you you're the only one, you're the only person that screws up, you're the only person with that attitude, the only person with that addiction, the only person that said they would do one thing and didn't do it, and you get feeling shame, guilt, despair, and then you isolate yourself. I mean, honestly, it's what he does to Adam at the very beginning. It's what he'll do to Elijah. It's what he's gonna do to David when he sleeps with Bathsheba and has adultery and then has her husband killed. It's what he's gonna do time and time and time again. It's what he does to Peter, and you need to know that's coming. The bad news is you're going to screw up, and the other bad news is the MO of the enemy, what he'll try to do, his mode of operation is to separate you, isolate you, and make you think you're not worth it anymore. And in that moment, Jesus is going to show up and say, no, I've redeemed you, I've redeemed your story. You and I are good, and you know what he wants to do after that? He wants to put you back to work. He wants to engage you in work. He wants you to do something. He wants to activate you. He doesn't want you to sit there in misery. Jesus is not the kind of coach that when you blow it on the field, he's like, get over on the bench and sit there. No. Jesus is the kind of coach that when you blow it, he's like, whoa, come here for a second, let's talk. You and I are good. You understand what happened. And then he pats you on the back and says, let's get back in and play. That's what he does with Peter. I want to dive a little bit deeper into the rest of this text. Here's what happens. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John. He only calls him that a few times, and it's always on really important occasions. Do you truly love me more than these? There's so much in that text I want to pack out, but I'm going to pick out a few words here that are important. We say we love a lot of things. Like, I love pizza, I love fly fishing, and I love my wife. I'm like, how can I use the same word for all three? Like, for real. Like, I love the Kansas City Chiefs, and I love my children. Like, okay. Sometimes the word love gets a little like messed up in our language. When this was written, it was written in Greek, and they would have used a few different words for love. I'm gonna talk about two. One is agape. It's like this deep, godly, deep love. The other one is phileo. This is not perfect, but I'm trying to explain it to to you guys in this room in a way that'll make sense. Agape is like a deep, deep, deep love. Phileo is like a real brotherly love, like an affectionate, like I really like you. And I'm just gonna use words love and like. Does that work? Agape and phileo are the two words. Agape's love, phileo's like, for just sake of argument right now. When Jesus looks at him, he says, hey, Peter, do you agape me? Like, do you really love me? And Peter answers it and he says, Lord, you know that I phileo you. You know that I like you. What are you doing, Peter? You are a moron. Like, the God of the universe just said he loved you, and you look back and said, yep, I like you too. Can you imagine that? If you're like, now I know this is not like romance type stuff. Like, I don't want to corrupt this text, but you can imagine if you look at somebody and go, man, I love you. I like you too. Uh-oh, like, that's friend zone now. Like, you know what I mean? Like, boo, that's not what's going on in this text, but it's like, hey, yeah. I'm trying to way you guys relate. Goes on in the text and he says, yes, Lord, you know that I like you. Jesus says, feed my lambs. He's giving him purpose. We'll camp on that in a second. Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John. Maybe you didn't hear me right. Simon, son of John, do you love me? Agape. Peter just kind of scratches his head for a second. He says, yes, Lord, you know that I like you. Oh, Peter, come on now. This is not the way this is supposed to go. Peter, do you love me? Lord, you know that I like you. Peter, do you agape me? Lord, you know that I phileo you. Ooh. And I think Peter means it. Like, I mean, I really do. And Jesus said, take care of my sheep. And then the third time he said, Simon, son of John, do you, and what did Jesus say? Do you, what's the word? Yeah, but what's the word? He doesn't. He doesn't, though. I think with a little twinkle in his eye, Jesus says, hey, Peter, do you like me? Peter's like, Peter, you know he's going to get it now. So Peter's like, Lord, you know, Jesus, you know that I, and what does Peter say? He says phileo. He just says, Lord, Jesus, Peter, do you like me? Lord, you know that I like you. So here's the lesson in all this. I believe that Jesus wants to catch you right where you are. I don't think he wants you to pretend to be something more than you're not. I don't think he's asking you to pretend, to make something up. In that moment, what he's trying to tell you is, I will take you right where you are. You don't need to fake it till you make it with me. When you blow it, when you screw up, I'm in this with you. I'm not asking you to invent. I'm not asking you to somehow act like you're more than what you are. If all you can do is meet me in the space where say, Lord, I like you in the midst of your screw up, he's going to say, you know what? I like you too. Let me meet you in this space. But he does something to Peter every time. He says, feed my lambs, take care of my sheep. One of the things that Jesus wants to do in the midst of our failure is restore us to his work. Put us back in the game. He's not trying to bench you. He's not trying to sideline you. He's not trying to tell you you're not good enough anymore. If anything else, he says, you and I are good. Get back on the field. You and I are good. Get back out and play. I've got a part for you on my team. I need you playing, Peter. Just like he needs you back in the game. So bad news is you're going to blow it, and the good news is Jesus can redeem anything. And one of the first things that he wants to do in the midst of your mistakes is restore you back to the game, put you back in. His desire is not to marginalize you, to isolate you, to tell you that you're worthless. When you're hearing that, you hear that voice, that's not Jesus, that's the enemy. And he'll do that in Peter's life. Peter will move on from this moment, and everything will change in his life. 50 days from this day, do you want to know where Peter is? 50 days from this day, you'll find Peter standing up at Pentecost preaching to 3,000 people because he will not back down. 3,000 people will come to the Lord because Peter refuses to be silent anymore. From there, he'll get arrested because he won't shut up. He'll stand up in front of religious leaders and he'll speak about Jesus, and they'll arrest him because he won't quit talking about Jesus. In Acts 4, he'll see this person that's paralyzed, and he'll heal them in a public place because he's no longer ashamed of the gospel, because he realizes his life, not just his soul. His soul is redeemed that day between him and Jesus and Luke, but his life has now been redeemed as well. He's been given new purpose. He's been given a new vision. And that's to love the church. He'll go to jail in Acts 5. Angel bails him out. Peter will be the first one who really understands that the gospel's for all, even the outcast. And Peter will take the gospel to him. In Acts 9, you'll see him traveling all around the world that he knew at that time, preaching Jesus. There's one moment where there's a little girl that had him shuddering in his shoes so much that he couldn't even talk about Jesus, but there's another little girl in Acts 9 that he'll bring back to life, and I bet she talks about Jesus. He's the first person to ever really understand that the gospel was for people like you and people like me, and unapologetically, he stood up against all the religious leaders of his day and said the gospel is for all forever. He was the first. In Acts 11, he'll get blasted for hanging out with outcasts, but he believes the gospel's for all forever. You know, Jesus warned Peter later on in this text. He says, Peter, someday they're going to stretch out your hands just like they did mine. And Peter, you're going to die a violent death just like I'm going to die. And Peter will find himself in Rome in AD 64. And they'll take Peter out because he refuses to shut up about who Jesus is. And they'll crucify him too. They'll crucify Peter. But church history holds that when they crucified him, they flipped him upside down because he didn't consider himself worthy to be crucified like Jesus. That's where Peter is 50 days from now. On that day, he was scared out of his ever-loving mind because he didn't know where his life was going. He's sitting in the room like a lot of you going, where's my life headed? I don't know what's going to go on. I followed Jesus. He and I are good, but where is my life going? 50 days from this day, when Jesus gives him new purpose, he'll be standing at Pentecost preaching, proclaiming who Jesus is, and 3,000 people come. 50 days from this day in John 21, Peter's life is radically changed because the Holy Spirit comes in him, and he will be bold for the rest of his days. Where could you be 50 days from now if you truly believe that Jesus can restore your heart and your mission? How could he change your home? How could he change your school? How could everything in the world around you look different on August 21st? 50 days from now. If you truly believe that Jesus could not just redeem your life, but redeem your mission, who could you be and where could you be 50 days from now? I know what happened in my life. Peter experienced the love of Christ and it transformed him. The same thing's true of me. At 18 years old, I sat in one of these conferences and I realized, man, Christ's love compels me. I'm convinced that one man died for me and therefore I died. And I don't want to live for myself anymore. I want to live for him completely. And so I make myself his ambassador. For the rest of my days, I've made myself his ambassador because that love has transformed every aspect of my life. And I can't think of anything else I'd rather do. I want to talk to some in this room right now. I want to be very specific, and this is not for everyone. This is not for everyone in the room. Buckle up, hold on. Jesus, give me wisdom here. Some of you in this room, I don't want to ask where you could be 50 days from now. For a very small set of you in this room, and this is not for everyone, I want to talk about where you could be 50 years from now. Who could you be if you surrendered your life to the hard mission of Jesus? And I can tell you, man, in my life pursuing vocational ministry, that this is what I do with every ounce of my being. I wake up every day wanting to proclaim who he is to people that are broken. I'm asking you to join a select group of people who understand the mission that he is for all forever. And we wake up every day to proclaim that to the attractive and the unattractive, to the broken and the busy, to the charming and the cheaters. I want people that for the next 50 years, not just the next 50 days, that will talk about the gospel. It's for the damaged and the discarded, for the easygoing and the hardworking. I'm looking for people who 50 years from now, in 2071, will still be proclaiming in churches around the nation that Jesus is for the giving and the cruel, for the goofy and the talented. I'm looking for people who will say that he's for the headstrong and for even the people that they hurt. For people who proclaim that Jesus is for both the jokers and the players, for the sinners and the saints, for the tired, for those who have been victimized, for those who have even given up their bodies of their own volition. People that will proclaim that he's for the oddballs and the outcast. I want to ask some of you in this room to say, where could you be not just 50 days from now? That's for all of us. What could you do if you allow God's Spirit to completely transform who you are? But there's another group, and I want to ask you, where could you be 50 days from now? For me, it meant walking away from a desire to be an attorney. I saw my whole life going to law school. Out of law school, I was going to work as a constitutional attorney, and from there, I was going to run for Senate. And in my mind, I got no doubt that I could totally stand up and run for Senate. I could beat people when it comes to running for office, and I could have a great time doing that. But for me, it was too small of a vision. Like, would I rather just run for Senate and like work in Congress or something like that? Or would I rather raise up 10, 15, 20,000 church planters that can transform the world? I mean, I want to feed his sheep. I want to feed his lamb. I want to take care of the church. I want to know that 50 years from that day in 1987, I'm still swinging. I'm still giving everything I've got. So much so that I'm the freak that has my coffin in my own office I'm going to be buried in someday. I ain't kidding. I know you think I am, but I'm not. Because I know that from the day I made that decision in 1987, just like Peter, until they either stretch out my arms or they put me 6 foot under and they eat potato salad and I'm done, I want to proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ for all, forever. That's it, man. So I want to ask you this question. 2 questions. The bad news you're going to screw up, the good news you can be redeemed. First question for everyone is, where could you be 50 days from now? If you let this Holy Spirit consume you, if you allowed him to completely wreck you in glorious and beautiful ways. And for another group of you, I'm asking you to consider what would happen if you just, with reckless abandon like I did as a senior in high school, said, I'm going to pursue proclaiming this gospel of for all forever for the next 50 years, and that's what I'll do. That's not for everybody in the room. You shouldn't feel guilty because it's not for everybody in the room. It's not. Don't feel guilty about it. It really isn't. Some of you in this room, you legitimately feel called right now going, that's me. God's been knocking at this door. It's what I'm supposed to do. I know it. So everybody just take a chill pill for a second as I end this. Everybody take a deep breath, because I get excited and wound up because it's just who I am, man. I'm not mad. I'm just excited. Legit question here. If God is telling you, he's telling all of us what we should do for the next what we should be 50 days from now. But if God is calling you to proclaim his name, through the local church, to proclaim his name to a lost world, to feed his sheep, and you want to commit to doing that until, kind of like me, they put you 6 foot under and it's over. If that's you and you know what God's calling you to be, I'm going to ask you, because if you can't stand up now, you can't stand up at your school, you can't stand up in a church, you can't stand up when it's difficult. Like, if you just don't have the fortitude to do it right now, you're not going to have the fortitude to do it later. That's just straight up truth. This is not easy, man. It is a job that full on you're going to get demeaned, full on you're going to get criticized, full on you're going to have a hard time measuring the metrics of what it is you're doing, full on you're going to have more people complain at you could ever realize. The job is unending because there's always people that are lost and broken, and for all of your days, this is what you'll do. But I'm telling you what, man, Christ's love compels me, and I could not picture myself, and I will not do anything else. Not until they take me out of this world. I'll proclaim his name to the day I die. If God's calling somebody in this room right now to do that, I want to know where you're going to be 50 years from now. Make that decision right here. Go ahead and stand up where you are right now. This is not for everybody. This is not for everybody. You should not feel guilted into this. I just need to talk to those who feel called to do this right now. Please don't sit there and feel like, I better stand up, I feel guilty. You shouldn't. If God's not calling you to do it, it's okay. It truly is okay. But if he's calling you to do that, I'm looking for a remnant of people who say, I will still be doing this 50 years from now. I'm co-laborers with everybody in this room. We all have work to do, whether you do it vocationally or you do it like my dad does on the construction site. Not saying one's better than the other, it's just different, baby, just different. That's all, just different. We need kingdom workers in schools. We need kingdom workers that are attorneys. We need kingdom workers that are amazing stay-at-home moms that raise up amazing kids. We need kingdom workers that are doing beautiful things. And it's not even dismissive. I truly mean this. My boys are kingdom workers, for the city in Kansas. My other son's going to do it through golf. Like, I get it. But for those of you standing up, don't you ever stop. Don't you ever back down. Don't you ever retreat. Do not be defeated by your worst day, because Jesus can redeem anything and everything. I won't be here 50 years from now. Go, Jesus, let me be here 50 days from now. That is not meant to be some sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. I promise, Lord. I'm not going to be here 50 years from now, but I pray that one of you are. And I pray you're still fighting. I pray you're still giving everything you've got to love his church with everything you've got. She's what matters. Adult leaders, I'm going to encourage you right now to pull these students aside and just pray over them. Not because they're somehow more special than people that are sitting down. That is not the case. It's not what I'm getting at. My boys are in a different world. You got to hear my heart, man. But I do want to pray over you guys for just a second. So adult leaders, can you pull them aside and just pray over them? Just take them aside and pray for them. For the rest of us, may you fight hard like Peter. May you fight hard. And may your world look different. May your home look different. May your life look different 50 days from now.